And our consumption activities in the economic system causes, production and consumption activities in the economic systems causes wastes and effluents to go back into the environment as wastes, effluents. And these are the things that cause pollution and stresses the environment. So the only sustainable way for an economy to grow rationally and reasonably is to grow in a right relationship with the environment.
I think, so also, just sorry to cut you in, what somebody like Kogo would be interested in knowing, do you have examples where this decoupling has happened or is happening, whether it's a country, it's an industry, or it's a farm?
Yeah, very clearly now in the past 10 to 15 years, so many countries, especially in the Western world, has begun to think about decoupling their economies from environmental degradation. If you think about countries like Germany, there's a lot of green development mechanisms that are putting in place. And analysis that has been done very recently show that their economy is still growing, even though they are still taking care of the environment. So, Kogo, my answer would be yes, it is possible to grow economies without also destroying the environment. And that can be possible through the intervention of technology. If you have smart technologies, then you'll be able to grow your economies with less impact on the environment. If you think now, when computers came out, now we have smarter computers that can do more things, more efficient, with less impact on the environment. And that also can be done in terms of transportation. So we have green transport systems, energy generation, we have green energy systems that we can use and still achieve the same goal. But the problem we have had in the past is that people are thinking about growing the economies as something that is on its own an ultimate good. And the environment is not taken into consideration.
My name is Donald Morema.
Yes, Donald.
And I'm calling from Mombasa.
Go ahead.
So my question is, what role citizens of the country play in conserving their own environment? Because it seems like the governments are not actually serious about tackling the climate change. For instance, the issue of Mau, the government is so divided on the way forward.
So you got the question. What role? Where did the citizens come in? They don't seem to have faith in the government.
Okay, thank you, Donald. I think this is also a very important question. The role of citizens in conserving the global commons.
We have another question. Go, who's calling? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Who's calling? Your name and your question, please.
From Omekata.
Go ahead, please. Purity.
It's Julie.
Julie.
It's Julie from Migori.
Yes, Julie, go ahead. Ask your question.
I would wish to know how everybody else is involved, especially at the school level. Because these are very important topics that you're discussing that affects everybody in the country and in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Migori.
Juliet Olik Migori. So I think the two questions tie in. One is on education, especially at primary school level with the young people. And another one was on the role of the public in the face of the fact that the government doesn't seem to take the necessary action that the public demands.
Yeah, I think if I go back to where I stopped in the last question, responding to Donald, citizens have a critical role to play in terms of conserving the environment. And citizens don't have to wait for governments before they can take actions that will be responsible to conserving their own environment. If you think about the environment as a thing that gives us life, that is what we are all depending on photosynthesis and the outputs of photosynthesis. That's where the energy that sustains life comes from. And then in that case, then I wouldn't need to wait for the government to take action before I start taking actions at my own local levels, in order to do the right things at the right time. I always say when I discuss these issues that every little counts. And if I take care of my farm sustainably and go green in terms of how I do my farming practices, and I begin to take care of my own way of using water, then I'm contributing to the global good. And that is very, very important. So that's what I call mindset decoupling. That as at the individual levels, we need to change our mindsets and also begin to realize that growth is not an ultimate good. If I have if I have to go to work, for instance, do I drive alone if I have a car, or do I car share with others? And all these things help to create changes in the way we are using the environment. Citizens can also play a role in terms of the refuse concept that we have in the 4R concept we have brought forward.
Yeah.
That citizens can be able to say, this industry cannot be established in my neighborhood because it's going to kill my river, it's going to kill my land, it's going to kill this. And they can put pressure on these multilateral companies to be able to do the right things. Citizens can also mobilize action to be able to cause environmental cleaning through tree planting and so on. You don't really need the government to plant a tree in your backyard. So, and we all know that tree planting is creating better sinks for CO2 emissions and the rest of it. So at all levels, citizens are actually at the center. Policies that governments make are only policies, and they cannot be effective except if it is implemented. So, Donald, that's a very important question, and my view is that citizens are actually the central actors in this system.
Yeah, and coming back to the second question, which is on education. So, particularly, I think here it's more with young people in schools. What's happening? These are, for example, the future leaders. Are there any programs, even in your organizations or elsewhere, that tries to sensitize these young people and equip them with the tools that they can be able to make a difference?
Now, that has become a very important thing. At the African Technology Policy Studies, which I work with here in Kenya, we have a program for African Youth Forum for Science and Technology. And within that program, we have the Climate Sense program, for instance. And that program is beginning to sensitize youths, if you like, catch them young, and begin to reorient their minds towards green development, towards sustainable growth, knowing that it is not better to grow continuously without thinking of the environment. To sensitize them about planting trees, to sensitize them about doing the little things that we need to do in order to be able to take care of the environment. So the ATPS also have something that they call Sustainable Water Management for Schools program, which will be going to schools with simple flyers to describe what water and sanitation could mean for the individual. Because all these little actions has implications for your health. It has implications for your well-being. It has implications for how you also use the resources you have in order to innovate and grow your personal household income, your individual income, and in total, also the general national incomes.
But do you work with teachers in these programs with schools? Because I think I would imagine teachers would be a very important actors also in terms of influencing the school children and young people in the schools.
Yes, the programs now are at its inception phases, and what we have been doing is have science cafe programs where we go to coffee shops and actually share this information and discussions. But in the coming year, we are going to be rolling out massive activities in schools.
Good morning. We have
Hello?
Yes. Hello, good morning. Go ahead.
Hello?
Hello.
My name is James Diaine.
James Diaine, go ahead. Ask your question.
James Diaine. I'm calling from Toyota.
Yeah, from Toyota, East Africa.
My question is, what are some of the economic incentives? What are some of the economic incentives that the government can adapt to encourage industry to internalize environmental protection in the production process?
Okay, thank you very much, James. If I get it right, you're from Toyota, Kenya, Toyota East Africa, and your question is you are asking after economic incentives that government can put in place in order to make industries clean up the externalities, is it?
Especially, I think, the car industry, the motor vehicle industry in this sense.
Okay, I think the answer to the question will also be two ways. One, the incentives for industries to go green is in the fact that they will be having corporate social responsibility. And that corporate social responsibility requires companies to be able to produce in a less polluting fashion, that is environmental decoupling, or to clean up the environmental mess that they cause, the pollution that they cause in their pollution processes. And this, I do not think the incentives should be positive incentives. The incentives should be actually enforcing the polluter pays principle, and the incentives should also be creating access to technologies and creating capacities for industries to be able to adopt these new technologies. But having said that, also industries that already have production plants that are polluting can be...
Hello?
Yes?
Hello?
Hello, go ahead. Ask your question. What's your name? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Hello, go ahead. Ask your question. Who's your name?
Hello?
Hello?
I think that one is not
Hello?
going through.
I think that's not coming through. Okay, yeah.
So there should be different forms of incentives that the country government should actually, in liaison with the private sector, be able to try to agree on ways that this pollution can be addressed.
Yeah.
Because it's a win-win scenario for environmental pollution to be addressed. Because in the end, the companies are going to make profit. And the ecosystem are going
just to pick up on
sustained.
that, I think, well, this question was from Toyota, which is a big multinational company. But you look at a country like Kenya, you have a lot of small micro enterprises. And I think this have a lot of...
University. I wanted to know
we have a question coming in.
ICANN program that is from ATPS.
That's Gregory wants to know about the ICANN program before we come back to the technology question.
Okay, Gregory, the first thing I would say is to direct you to the ATPS website where the concepts for the ICANN program can be downloaded. And the website is http://atpsnet.org. I take it again, www.atpsnet.org. The ICANN program, the Youth Innovation Challenge program of the ATPS, actually has 4 main components. One is actually the innovation incubation activities.
Yeah.
So the initiatives where the ATPS and its partners are bringing together innovators who are coming up with ways of doing things differently and ways of doing things better for the environment, for economic growth, for social inclusion, and for better governance and the rest of it, and linking them up with other entrepreneurs.
Are you online in studio? Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello, go ahead.
My name is Hussein Miji.
Hussein Miji. Hello, Hussein.
My name is Hussein Miji.
Yes.
And I'm calling from Lamu.
From Lamu. Yes, Hussein, ask your question.
Yes, I'm calling from Lamu. And I have one question, please, I need to ask you.
Yes, ask your question.
My question is, and the question is, through the economic growth and environment,
yeah.
Do you think that the Sharia that has been implemented through the vocal of sound, the 40 dBs and 30 meters,
yeah, go ahead.
of Muslim not to call for prayers,
yes.
Do you think that is one of part of growing or economic growth and development? Because if someone as a Muslim calls for prayers,
yes,
the NEMA sets aside that you will be prosecuted to send to jail 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years and 250,000 as a...
Okay. Thanks, Hussein. Basically, got the gist of his question.
Yes. Okay.
It's about the noise pollution levels and the impact on different groups. For example, I think the religious groups who have to sort of use public noise when they are, well, you know,
PA systems.
Yeah, PA systems.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hussein. We'll get to your question. But first, let me finish the issue of the gentleman asking for the ICANN program. So then the capacity build, there's a second activity that's on capacity building, which is trying to raise awareness, build capacity in these areas. And there's also peer-to-peer learning. So if we find youths that are actually doing very well, matching them with other youths so that they can also learn from it is also another activity. And then leadership training. Like when you were asking, you said, these are the leaders of tomorrow. Yeah. And then we need to start now to build green concepts in their minds. Innovation in their minds so that they will be able to come up with innovative ways of addressing these huge challenges and complex challenges that we have in our world today. And I think you'll be welcome to visit the website and send further questions so that the coordinators of that Why I Can program, Mr. Mazden Momanyi, can liaise with you to take that forward. Now, for the question by Hussein,
very quickly.
Yeah, the issue of noise pollution is an issue also of fairness. Yeah. It's also an issue of equity. So, and I would not want to comment on the policies of controlling the noise pollution or not controlling the noise pollution, but the question I would ask is that one should be conscious of the implications, the externalities of his actions or her actions on the neighborhood, on the other people. So that's the way I would like to address that one for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Urama. Unfortunately, because of time, we cannot handle all your questions, but we thank all of you for participating, those who sent in SMS and those who called in. We will be back next week, and hopefully also after the Copenhagen meeting, we will have Dr. Urama to discuss some of the outcomes of the climate change deliberations. But for now, this is your host, Philip Osano, and wishing you a very good week. Welcome to Echo Show program. If you're just tuning in on KBC Channel 1, this is your popular environment program that comes to you every Sunday. We hope you're having a very good Sunday. Today we are continuing with the topic from last week's discussion, which is economic growth and environment. And with us in the studio is Dr. Kevin Urama. Dr. Urama, welcome back.
Thank you.
Dr. Urama is the Executive Director of Africa Technology Policy Studies Network, which is based here in Nairobi, and also the inaugural president of the African Society for Ecological Economics. The topic for discussion today, actually, while we are looking at economic growth and environment, we have a lot of questions from last week which we'll be handling that we couldn't handle in last week's program. But today we are really interested in going to this debate about climate change. You are aware that the Copenhagen Conference on Climate Change is underway, and Dr. Urama has just arrived from Copenhagen. So he will be able to brief us on what's going on in Copenhagen. Just as a start, could you tell us what's happening in Copenhagen and what the discussion is all about on the climate change negotiations, and how is that proceeding?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you viewers for tuning in. The Copenhagen meeting, the COP15 meeting happening in Copenhagen as we speak, is actually a congregation of several countries, several nations, and also several lobby groups with different positions and views regarding what the world needs to do in order to cut CO2 emissions and to address the impacts of climate change. The discussions has largely centered around what countries should cut emissions and what emissions should be cut. There's also another group there that's actually talking about the science of climate change, whether climate change itself is happening and whether it is due to human errors, human activities, or actually natural processes. But whichever way anyone thinks about this, one common agreement is that the poor countries, such as Africa, is actually suffering first and most from the increasing changes in weather patterns that we're seeing, and also the CO2 emissions that we are seeing. There's also a common agreement that industrialized nations are more responsible for the emission of carbon dioxide, the CO2 emissions that is causing the problems that is in question and is being discussed there. So actually there's increasing awareness in the meeting there that even though there are several countries represented, that what is now being popularly called the G2 countries matter most, and that is US and China. This is because together, both US and China emit over 40% of global CO2 emissions. And because of that, it is being seen that they are taking leadership in agreeing onto legally binding commitments to cut CO2 emissions in their own countries will go a long way to helping the world address the impacts of climate change. But what we are seeing is actually more of a focus on growth.
Is that economic growth or what?
A focus on economic growth, growth in gross domestic product. Actually, China has currently pegs its own commitments or promise of commitments to cutting emissions as a percentage of growth. So that sends some worrying signals to me as an ecological economist who is thinking about the sustainability of the global ecosystems, that the commonwealth of life, that actually sustains the economy itself as a subset of the ecosystem. And then the U.S. has also made some signals of promising to cut emissions by 17% of their 2005 levels. Yeah. And that means also that the cuts that they are promising is also not sufficient to be able to achieve the required level of emission reduction that we require by 2020 in order to avert the greatest impacts of climate change. Now, the other complication in the discussion is actually that China is classed as a developing country, as a developing economy.
So China is classed in the same category as Kenya?
As Kenya, Africa, and the rest of them, Bangladesh and the rest of them. Yeah. But actually, in terms of CO2 emissions, China has overtaken the U.S. in terms of emission of carbon dioxide.
Is that per capita emissions or is it overall?
The percentage of overall global emissions. Yeah. And what that then means is that the U.S. is digging in to say that if China remains in, that China should not be expecting to receive any forms of funding from the U.S. to help it cut emissions. And actually that China should also take on legally binding agreements on what emissions to cut and what emissions not to cut. And then China still continues to discuss the issue that they would like to keep their own promise of cutting emissions as a percentage, 40 to 50% of their growth at 2005 levels. So that's the sticking point of the debate at the moment.
So if I may summarize, I think what you're saying, one is that it seems that the outcome of this Copenhagen conference will be dependent on what action the United States and China take, or at least what kind of emission levels they do take, or commitments that they undertake. And two, where is the place of Africa? What are African negotiators doing? What's happening? I think a lot of people there would like to know where there was a common African position, I understand, and how has this gone on with the debate that has shifted?
Yeah, the position of the Africans remain as the position that they had by the negotiators before they went to Copenhagen. And that is actually now being popularly referred to as environmental reparations, which means that Africa is requesting or expecting that the developed countries should be able to help Africa build capacity to adapt. That basically, in put in simple terms, that the developed countries should be able to pay for the emissions that they have caused, so that Africa can be able to clean up and adapt to these CO2 emissions that is causing problems for the poor in Africa. So that debate has remained. But then what we are seeing is that many countries are not very proactive in being able to say what they are going to be able to commit, because each country is watching the other to see what the other country will be able to commit before they make their own commitments. A very interesting turn in the discussion was that from the European Union, which 2 days ago, actually came up with a commitment that they will be able to commit about 2.4 billion euros. That amounts to about $3.5 billion US to help the poor countries to adapt and also to cut emissions. So that's now a welcome discussion, part of the discussion. But a careful analysis also sees that this is like a drop in the ocean with regards to what Africa requires, let alone the rest of the developing countries that they will require in order to be able to adapt to CO2 emissions. And also, if you consider the irony of how much money that the developed countries were able to gather together in order to bail out the failing banks.
Is that in the financial crisis?
During the financial crisis. Then this becomes like a drop in the ocean. And this is simply a symptom of the fact that the global leaders are not yet facing the reality of the fact that saving the planet is much more than saving the economic and financial systems that we so much rely on and focus on at this moment.
Yeah. So I think the whole point is that I think that there's some good news. There's an indication from the EU about commitment to help not just African countries, but I guess that would be all developing countries would be able to benefit from that package. But also what one would expect that other developed countries, Canada, Australia, United States, would also come in with a package. And I think so that's one, but two also, I think there's also the question of how well will this money be used in Kenya or in Ethiopia. I mean, I think a lot of, some of the record that this country have in using donor money or aid money is not one that is very positive. So I think, is that a concern to developed countries?
Actually, you are very right. The European Union actually is like saying we will be able to cut emissions even up to 30% if other countries are doing similar things. And also we'll be able to commit this amount of money if other. So it's still very conditional. And that is where the dialogue is still very sticky at the moment. And then also because on the 18th, we're expecting that President Obama will be there. And so with many other world leaders. And actually, it's in the run-up to that period, now that the negotiation is beginning to shape up, so that countries, it's very positive that the European Union is giving the signal so that other countries can also begin to give signals. But much more important is that countries should be able to face the reality of the impending climate catastrophe that we're facing and be able to take actions. For me, negotiations are very important, but it should not be pegged on how much will it affect my GDP and my economy. Because my economy is there because the ecosystem is there to sustain it. So my expectation, my plea is that global leaders should take leadership, that they should do transformative things, take transformative actions today in order to be able to actually save the planet.
Actually, when you talk about the fact that you should look at environmental conservation or climate change mitigation with or separate from the economic growth or the impact of economic growth. That brings me to, I think, one of the questions we had last week, which is, I think viewers would be interested to know. This was from Maron Nyagaku, who is a student at Kenyatta University. So Maron's question is that, what is the difference between economic growth and economic development? Could you perhaps brief us on what is a positive externality in economic development and how does that relate to environment? So I think the question is, always when there's this debate about curbing CO2 emissions or addressing climate change, it's linked back to economic growth. And I think the country's argument, for example, countries that are developing, African countries, are saying that if we are not able to industrialize or have economic growth, then there's the question of us not being able to catch up with the developed world, which is what we're trying to do. And it ends up that we are still pegging even the issue to address climate change on the impact on GDP per capita, which, as we discussed last week, that is perhaps not the right thing to do, given all the problem we have with all these measures of economic growth. So perhaps as you address Maron's question, you could also expand on, what alternatives are out there, and what, particularly the question I asked about what negotiators from Africa are putting on the table. Just apart from the financial package, is there anything else?
Now, the issue of the difference between economic growth and economic development is huge. Because like we discussed last week, economic growth focuses mainly on growing GDP, gross domestic product. And this is just a measure of the total quantity of goods and services produced within a period in a country. And that is measured in terms of per capita GDP and the rest of all those reduced measures of growth. But then economic development begins to think about distribution of incomes. It begins to include the issues of the quality of the goods and services produced within the country. Because for economic growth, even if you are fighting wars and producing ammunition,
so
you are growing.
Because you're selling weapons.
Because you are selling weapons, you are cleaning up the impacts of the war. If you are destroying forests and logging in order to create woods and furniture and do increase your exports, you are growing. But then that's bearing negative on the measure of development in terms of the quality of life of the citizens.
Yeah.
And then, if I take this to the current debate, that the dialogue that is happening in Copenhagen, one would expect that a more holistic view of what the impacts of climate change is taken into consideration by the negotiators. One, can we think about building capacities of nations to be able to adapt? They have scientific, technological, and innovation capacity to be able to adapt, to produce the necessary food they need, without really increasing CO2 emissions by taking the more conventional ways of farming that are actually CO2 intensive. Are we also thinking about increasing their capacity to be able to access basic human resources that they need in order to have a sustainable livelihood, so that they're also not destroying forests in terms of logging for wood and for firewood and the rest of all those? So if we take the debate to that global level, it becomes very abstract. But if you take the debate to that local level, it becomes very practical, that every little action we take counts. And in my view, sustainable progress will depend not only on reaching a deal and signing a piece of paper in Copenhagen. It actually will depend on what we discussed last week, which is countries decoupling from their growth from environmental pollution. That is, the word decoupling simply means ensuring that you are growing more efficiently and not creating more impacts on the environment by the per capita GDP growth. And from that perspective, one could begin to argue that the position of China could begin to increase efficiency in growth. Becomes a welcome discussion. But then the question then is the percentage that they are promising to give, is that enough to be able to avert the global catastrophe that we are facing? That, I think, is what the